Welcome to another deep dive. We're going to be tackling how companies stay ahead in a world that just doesn't stop changing. You guys sent in some really interesting research from David Teese, Gary Pisano, and Amy Schwinn.
Oh, yeah, these researchers, they kind of changed how we think about having an edge.
Yeah,
It's not just about having the best product out there anymore.
right. It seems like that whole build a moat and hunker down strategy is like not enough anymore when everything's in flux.
Yeah.
So then how can companies stay, nimble? That's where this idea of dynamic capabilities comes in, right?
Yeah.
Honestly, even the term is a bit intimidating.
Uh-huh.
Like, can I even get dynamic capabilities?
Well, it is a powerful concept, but, it's more about building the right muscles in your company, so to speak.
Okay.
See, a lot of those classic business models, they sort of assume things stay pretty stable.
Yeah.
But that's not the real world. The real world is messy. Competitors pop up, tech comes in and disrupts everything. Customers, they change their minds all the time.
It's like those old textbook strategies. They're trying to play chess, but somebody keeps flipping the board over.
Exactly. So TC and his colleagues, they argue that companies need to go beyond just playing the game. They need to be able to change the game, the one they're playing.
Okay, so less static defenses and more, what, constantly evolving?
Yes. Think of it like building strength and flexibility within the company.
Okay, yeah.
TC, he breaks it down into three core elements: coordination, learning, and then reconfiguration.
All right, three elements. So kind of like a three-legged stool.
Mm-hmm.
If one leg's weak, the whole thing's wobbly.
Perfect analogy.
All right.
So first you got coordination. How well does the company connect all of its parts? Internally between teams, but also externally with partners and suppliers. You think of a company where information flows easily, decisions are made fast, everybody's moving in sync.
Okay, so like a well-oiled machine where you don't even notice the parts working because it's just so smooth.
Right.
What about learning? I get how people learn, but how does a whole company do that?
Right. It's more than just, employees taking some courses. It's about building a culture of shared knowledge.
Uh-huh.
Teams actually collaborating to solve problems, turning mistakes into lessons, and constantly improving based on what they experience. Think of those companies where every project is a chance for the whole group to get a little bit smarter.
So if coordination is connecting the dots, learning is about understanding what those connections mean and then using them to get better.
Yeah.
And then there's reconfiguration. This is where it gets really interesting.
Yes. This is the ability to sense when the market is changing and reshape the company to meet those demands. It's about being agile, responsive, and able to make big shifts when they're needed. Think of a company like Microsoft.
Oh, yeah.
They started with software, but had to completely reinvent themselves to embrace the internet.
That was huge. They didn't just fiddle around the edges. They basically changed the whole game they're playing.
Right.
But how do companies actually build these dynamic capabilities? It can't just be like putting up a motivational poster in the break room.
Right. It's definitely not about slogans.
Okay, good.
It's a lot deeper than that.
Yeah.
This is where the idea of distinctive competencies comes in. These are the unique strengths that a company develops over time, and they're hard for competitors to copy.
So it's like their secret sauce, what
Yeah.
makes them stand out.
Exactly. And these competencies aren't things you just buy off the shelf. They're embedded in the company's processes, the culture, the way they do things.
Yeah.
That's why you can't just copy-paste success, from one company to another.
It's like trying to bottle lightning. Just because it works for one company doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody.
Right. And Teese actually gives two main reasons for that. First, a lot of a company's knowledge is tacit. It's the kind of knowledge you can't really write down in a manual. It's like trying to explain how to ride a bike. You just got to do it.
Yeah, it's the stuff you learn by trial and error, by years of working together as a team.
Exactly. And second, even when you can write some knowledge down, the context still matters. What works in one company in one industry might not work somewhere else.
Fancy.
It's like trying to, transplant a tree from one environment to another.
Right.
It might not take root.
So just blindly copying another company without understanding the why behind their success, that's a recipe for disaster.
I'd say that's pretty accurate. In fact, Teese argues that becoming obsessed with beaten competitors, what he calls strategizing, that can actually be harmful.
Wait, really? But shouldn't you always be trying to, outmaneuver your rivals?
Awareness is one thing, but fixating on the competition, it can actually distract you from building those internal strengths, those distinctive competences we were talking about.
Okay.
And it can lead to like short-term thinking and neglecting those deeper, more valuable capabilities.
So it's less about winning the battle and more about building the skills and the systems that make you a formidable force, like in any battle.
Precisely. T says that companies need to economize rather than just strategize. It's about making internal operations efficient, effective, and about cultivating those strengths that set you apart over the long run.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see the bigger picture here, but can you give us some concrete examples of what these dynamic capabilities look like, in action, like in industries, I might be familiar with?
Absolutely. Let's start with the auto industry. Think about the lean production model that Toyota pioneered.
Right, the system that's all about eliminating waste and constantly improving.
Exactly. To implement lean production, companies needed to completely overhaul their processes. It wasn't just a few tweaks here and there. It required deep coordination between teams, constant learning and adapting, and the ability to reconfigure, entire production systems.
So it's not just, an abstract idea, it's a real-world example of those three elements of dynamic capabilities working together.
Yeah.
What about other industries?
Well, the tech industry is another great example. We already mentioned Microsoft, but think about companies like Apple or Google.
Yeah, they're always releasing new products, adapting to the digital world. I mean, it seems like they're like 10 steps ahead.
Right. They are masters of coordinating complex projects, learning from their mistakes, and reconfiguring themselves to seize new opportunities. And their success is really built on these dynamic capabilities. And don't forget about the pharmaceutical industry.
What's interesting about them?
They often excel at what we call incremental innovation, so building on their existing knowledge to develop new drugs and therapies.
Hmm.
They have really robust systems for research, highly specialized teams, and they're adept at navigating that complex world of regulations.
So their distinctive competences are in their deep, scientific knowledge, their project management skills, and their regulatory expertise. Precisely. And those competences have allowed them to thrive in a very competitive and constantly evolving industry.
This is all fascinating,
Yeah.
and it really highlights how those three elements, coordination, learning, and reconfiguration, can make all the difference for a company's success. But I'm curious to learn more about how we can actually apply these ideas to our own, careers and businesses.
That's a great question. It's one we'll definitely dive into further in the next part of our deep dive.
So we've covered those three core elements of dynamic capabilities: coordination, learning, and reconfiguration. But you mentioned that distinctive competences are built, not bought. And that makes me wonder, what are those building blocks? Like, are we talking about things like a company's technology or maybe their finances?
You hit on a crucial point. Those traditional assets definitely matter. But we also need to think beyond what's just on the balance sheet. There's this concept of complementary assets, which really enhance the value of a company's core strengths.
Complementary assets. So not just having the ingredients, but having the right tools to use them. Exactly. Think about a company with cutting-edge tech.
Right.
They might have this groundbreaking new product, but if they don't have a good distribution network to get it to customers or a strong brand reputation, that amazing product might just sit on the shelf.
It's like having a killer recipe but no oven to bake it in. You need the whole package to really succeed.
Exactly. And these complementary assets, they're often very specific to a particular industry or even a company. They can be just as hard to copy as the core technology itself. You can't just buy a global supply chain or a beloved brand overnight.
It takes time, investment, and understanding how all the pieces fit together. This reminds me of that idea of path dependency we talked about earlier, how the decisions a company makes early on can kind of have this ripple effect years down the line.
Absolutely. The choices a company makes shape its assets, its processes, and ultimately those dynamic capabilities we've been talking about. It's like a river carving its path through the landscape. Over time, it creates this unique route based on the terrain it encounters.
And it's not like that river can just suddenly decide to change direction, right? It's
Yeah.
bound by the path it's already carved.
Exactly. Companies, like rivers, are shaped by their history, and their ability to change course is influenced by where they've already been.
Okay, so we've talked about like technological assets and those complementary assets. What other types of assets are there that contribute to building dynamic capabilities?
Well, we can't forget about financial assets. Having cash flow and access to capital, This gives a company the resources to invest in new technology, to acquire those complementary assets we talked about, and to navigate through, tough times.
Yeah, makes sense. Even with a great product and a talented team, without, solid financials, you're not going to get very far.
Exactly. And in the long run, it's more about consistently generating cash flow from operations than just having a big pile of money sitting around.
So it's not just about having wealth, it's about having a healthy, I guess, like financial metabolism.
Perfect analogy. Then there's reputation, something that's often overlooked but can be a huge asset. It's about the trust and goodwill a company builds with its customers, suppliers, and even competitors.
Reputation, it's like a fragile flower, you know?
Mm,
It takes time and care to cultivate, but it can be crushed pretty easily.
exactly. A strong reputation, it can attract talent, it can help secure partnerships, and even influence regulators. On the flip side, a damaged reputation can be incredibly difficult and expensive to repair.
Okay, so we've got technological assets, complementary assets, financial assets, and reputation. Anything else we should be thinking about?
We also need to consider structural assets.
Mhm.
And this refers to how a company is organized. The formal and informal structures, the reporting lines, the decision-making processes, even the company culture.
I imagine like a rigid hierarchical structure might struggle to adapt quickly compared to a company that's more, decentralized and agile.
Exactly. A company structure is like its skeleton,
Yeah.
provides support. But if it's too rigid, it'll limit flexibility.
Hmm.
You need a structure that can move and bend with the times.
Makes sense. You need a framework that can support those dynamic capabilities we're trying to build. So we've covered quite a few asset categories. Is that everything?
One more. We can't forget about institutional assets. And this is about the broader environment the company operates in. Things like, government policies, intellectual property laws, and even the quality of the local education system.
So it's about like the ecosystem a company lives in, not just its internal resources.
Precisely. Those external factors, they can have a big impact on a company's ability to innovate and compete. For instance, strong intellectual property laws. They can encourage investment in research and development because companies know their inventions will be protected.
And on the other hand, if like regulations are constantly changing or unclear, companies might hesitate to take risks.
Exactly. So as you can see, dynamic capabilities are shaped by this complex web of different assets,
Mm.
both those within the company and those in the broader environment. It's not just about having the best tech or the deepest pockets. It's about the right combination of assets and the ability to use them effectively.
It's like being a chef, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about having top-notch ingredients, it's about knowing how to combine them in the right way to create something truly special.
That's a great analogy.
Mm.
And just as a chef's skills are developed over years of practice and experimentation, a company's dynamic capabilities are honed through trial and error, learning, and adapting over time.
It's a continuous journey, not a one-time fix. But it seems like we've uncovered this like secret recipe for success.
Yeah.
So what's the first step for a company that wants to start, cultivating its own dynamic capabilities?
Well, before you start whipping up any new recipes, you need to take stock of your current pantry.
Hmm.
You know, what are you already good at? What are your weaknesses? What are your distinctive competences?
So it's about understanding what you're bringing to the table before you start cooking.
Right.
But once you know what you have, how do you actually start like building those capabilities? Is it about hiring the right people, investing in new technology, restructuring the organization?
It's likely a combination of all those things and more. But before jumping into specific actions, it's crucial to understand your path. Look back at the decisions you've made and the experiences you've had, both the good and the bad.
Ah, that idea of path dependency again. You're saying we need to learn from our past to guide our future.
Exactly. Those past successes and failures, they have shaped your current capabilities. By understanding how you got to where you are, you can make better choices about where to go next.
So it's like looking back at a map to figure out the best route forward. I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. It's about understanding how capabilities, assets, and path dependency, they all interact. It's about seeing the business as this dynamic, evolving organism.
That's a great way to put it. And just like a gardener tending to their plants,
Mm.
providing them with the right nutrients, sunlight, and water, companies need to actively cultivate those dynamic capabilities, nurture them, adapt them, and help them grow.
So it's an ongoing process, not a one-time event. But how do we know if we're moving in the right direction? Like, how do you actually measure dynamic capabilities? Is there some kind of dynamism scorecard we can use?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, there's no single metric that captures it all. It's not something you could just look up in a quarterly report.
So if there's no like single dynamism score, how do we track our progress? Do we just have to like rely on gut feeling and anecdotes?
Well, intuition and observation, they're definitely important, but we can be more systematic than that.
Okay.
One approach is to look at how well a company's performing on those three core elements we've been talking about:
Right.
coordination, learning, and reconfiguration.
Okay, so let's break that down. How do you measure something like coordination? It just seems like such an intangible concept.
Yeah, you're right. It can be tricky to quantify, but there are some indicators we can look at.
Okay.
For example, how smoothly does information flow between departments?
Mm-hmm.
How quickly are decisions made? How well do teams collaborate on projects?
So if we're seeing like constant bottlenecks, delays, people working in silos,
Hmm.
that's a sign coordination needs some work.
Exactly. And on the learning front, we can ask, how effectively does the company capture and share knowledge? Are they documenting lessons learned from projects? Are they creating systems for uh, mentoring and knowledge transfer? Are they encouraging people to experiment and innovate, even if it means, making some mistakes along the way?
So if a company seems to be constantly reinventing the wheel,
Oh, yeah.
repeating the same mistakes, that's a red flag.
Absolutely. Suggests they're not learning from their experiences as effectively as they could be.
Okay. And what about reconfiguration? How do you measure a company's ability to like adapt and change?
Well, we could look at their track record. Have they successfully launched new products or entered new markets when needed?
Yeah.
Have they been able to adjust their business models to meet evolving customer needs?
Right.
Can they shift gears quickly when the landscape changes?
So if a company is like clinging to outdated products or clinging to their like old ways of doing things, even when the market is clearly shifting, that's a sign they might need to work on their reconfiguration skills.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that these three capabilities, they're all interconnected. Strong coordination, that can actually make learning easier, which in turn can make reconfiguration smoother and more effective.
It's like that virtuous cycle we were talking about before.
Right.
Everything builds on everything else.
Exactly. And just as a doctor would monitor a patient's vital signs, companies need to keep an eye on these indicators of dynamic capabilities,
Hmm.
to get a sense of their overall health and agility.
Okay, so we're checking the pulse, taking the temperature, making sure everything's flowing as it should.
Mhm.
But even if we have a good grasp of our current capabilities, how do we make sure they stay relevant in the long run? I mean, the world is changing faster than ever. How do we avoid becoming dinosaurs?
That's where strategic foresight comes into play. It's the ability to anticipate future trends, to identify emergent opportunities and threats before they fully materialize.
So it's like having a crystal ball,
Yeah.
peering into the future, seeing what's coming.
Well, it's not quite that mystical, but it does involve gathering information from a wide range of sources, analyzing trends, and developing scenarios for the future.
Mm.
It's about asking what if
Mhm.
and exploring different possibilities so you're not caught off guard.
So it's about being proactive, not just reactive,
Yeah.
not waiting for the world to change around you, but actively trying to anticipate those changes and position yourself accordingly.
Exactly. Strategic foresight can help companies figure out which capabilities they need to develop to stay competitive in the future. Allows them to start building those muscles today so they're ready for whatever tomorrow throws their way.
This all makes sense, but it also seems like there might be some tension between like maintaining existing capabilities and building new ones.
Mhm.
How do you balance exploiting what you're already good at with exploring new possibilities?
That's a great point. It's a classic dilemma for businesses.
Yeah.
On the one hand, they need to keep refining and leveraging their current strengths to generate profits and stay afloat.
Right.
But on the other hand, they can't just stand still. They need to explore new territory, experiment, and develop those new capabilities that'll keep them relevant in the long run.
So it's like walking a tightrope between stability and innovation.
Yeah.
How do companies, find that balance and avoid taking a tumble?
There's no easy answer. It's a constant balancing act, carefully allocating resources between refine what works and exploring what might work even better.
So it's not an either situation.
Right.
You can't just focus on one at the expense of the other.
Exactly. Companies need to do both, and they need to find a way to do them well. It's about finding that sweet spot. that dynamic equilibrium between harnessing your existing strengths and preparing for what's next.
Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive into the world of dynamic capabilities. We've learned how crucial they are for companies to not just survive, but to thrive in today's, rapidly evolving business landscape. We explored those core elements, coordination, learning, and reconfiguration. We even took a look at all the different assets that can influence a company's dynamic potential.
And we talk about how a company's past choices, they can create what we call a path dependency that shapes its future options.
Right.
We also discuss the importance of strategic foresight, thinking ahead, and preparing for the challenges and opportunities that lie on the horizon.
So to wrap things up, I want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question. If you were at the helm of a company, what steps would you take to develop your own dynamic capabilities?
And remember, it's not about copying what other companies are doing.
Okay.
It's about understanding your unique strengths and weaknesses, the path you've traveled and where you want to go.
Yeah.
It's about fostering a culture that embraces learning, that prioritizes, seamless coordination, and values the agility to reconfigure and transform when needed.
Mm-hmm.
The business landscape is constantly evolving, and dynamic capabilities are no longer a luxury. They're the key to survival and success.
So keep diving deep, explore your potential, nurture your assets, and embrace the dynamic journey ahead.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those deep dives going.